Ryan and Sarah. So good to meet you, Ryan. Thanks for so much for coming on. Good to see you, Sarah. We're excited to bring on our guest Ryan, and I'll let Sarah pronounce his last name.
Ryan Denehy, the
Yeah,
CEO of Electric AI. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, we can use the AI.
Were you AI before AI was cool?
Oh yeah, when I registered the domain name in 2016, I had people asking me if we had an office in Anguilla, which is where the domain AI domain
Wow.
extension is from. So yeah.
You
that's
were, I think, like one of the first really on the AI trend. So you should get credit for that,
Well, for the
inventing it.
longest time, we were telling people just like, no, we're just called Electric, not Electric.ai. And I've just stopped trying to correct people at this point because there's more upside than downside, I think, right?
Exactly. You get like
definitely.
a huge valuation increase now from it.
Totally.
And also, so when you started this, so you started at other previous companies before. So Electric.ai is now about 7 years old.
Yep, exactly.
So you definitely were way before the AI hype train. Um, what so I'd love to hear in your words what exactly electric is, and how it kind of came to be as well.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. IT management for businesses that don't have full-time IT staff.
Yep.
And so we really started life as more of a tech-enabled managed service, which made a lot of sense. It meant that we could basically, within 6 weeks of launching an MVP, we were able to get out there and let's say you were a 20-person recruiting firm, we could come in and help you manage your computers, your SaaS, the,
Right.
network in your office, all that good stuff. Your employees could reach out to us on Slack and get help with all of those things. We had a dashboard you could log into,
Right.
to manage all that stuff. And so that was and still is ultimately the customer segment we're focused on. It's the 2+ million businesses in the US that have an
Right.
IT budget. So you're buying software, you're buying computers, you're starting to care about things like security, but you do not and may never have full-time IT staff. So
Okay.
basically 99% of the IT software out there is built for corporate IT departments.
Yes.
And so sort of looked at that and said, it's gotta be a really easy way for a non-technical person to just be like, all right, I'm not going to get hacked. I can get the new employee a computer when they need it. Life is easy. But yeah, the genesis of this company was really started back in, I don't know, call it 2013 when I was running my previous startup in San
Yep.
Francisco and
Yep.
spent a weekend setting up laptops for our new sales hires. And I was like, this is silly.
Right.
There's got to be a better way. And I pinged a bunch of my investors, and because at the time we had just started using Zenefits for HR and payroll, and I was like, hey,
Oh, interesting.
is there like an IT version of Zenefits basically where I can just like do complicated stuff in a dashboard? And
Yeah.
everyone got back to me like, no, not really. Like that, I don't think you can solve that problem with software. I'm like, that's crazy coming from a VC. No, it
Yet
was probably,
again, VCs are idiots. I'm just kidding.
yeah. I
Oh,
mean, it was, but it was like, I mean, I'll be the first to say, like, I started my first two companies for a lot of the wrong reasons. It was like I didn't want to work for anybody,
yeah.
and I just wanted to go build something, right?
Right.
But
Right.
Electric was the first company of the three that I started that was really born out of like an actual pain that I felt as the customer. And fortunately, I think it's the best idea of the three that I've had. So I'm glad I didn't waste it on my immaturity,
Right.
15 years ago.
But those other two ideas obviously led to what you're building now,
Yeah, it seemed
which
like
is
you had
awesome.
at least one solid exit out of
Yes.
those previous
Yeah.
previous
No.
deals.
Yeah. Well, that was my last company. It was a retail analytics platform for SMB retailers. Basically, we could just tell you how many people were walking into and out of your store and
Yeah.
what merchandise was selling and not. And that was there were lots of solutions like that on the market, but they were for big box retailers. And so my co-founder and I in 2012 just thought, what if you could really shrink that down and make it available to the millions of independent mom and pop retailers? And so So yeah, that was a cool business. A lot of hard lessons learned. I mean, we built hardware, which I would
Right.
strongly advise against anyone doing. Um, all seemed so obvious in hindsight that like with hardware, for example, if you make a prototype, like already you're out the cost of, $50,000, $100,000 to have the factory in Taiwan make the prototypes. But then
Right.
as you get things into production, like software is great because you can identify a bug and then just like ship the code at night. And then the next morning your customers wake up and they're like, sweet, the button moved back to the right place.
Right. Right.
But like with hardware, like we basically bet the ranch and had like 5,000 pre-orders for these like devices that would basically just, use an infrared beam to measure the foot traffic. And like,
Right.
our factory like soldered the chip wrong. And so
Oh
like
god.
one in five of the devices was leaking
Oh,
battery acid through the
Jesus.
box when they showed up. I'm like, oh my God. Like it
Right.
just made me love software that much more and also have some sort of respect for people that produce physical goods.
Well, and also the cash flow cycle, right? That's what I don't think I never really understood like how important that is. Like the SaaS cash flow cycle is you basically get paid. You build a product with R&D budget, and then you get paid for the actual software and the software to run. Like you basically just it runs on servers, so you don't have to pay anything. With hardware, you have to either get a loan from a bank or somehow finance the production of the hardware and then hope for it to sell.
Yeah, no, it's a nightmare. I mean, again, like we raised $3.5 million for that business.
Yeah.
And the idea was, yeah, you know, let's go build our own hardware. Let's do the point of sale integration so we can get the sales data from the stores.
Right.
Let's have an inside sales team. Yeah, this was probably the best learning lesson in terms of, as a multi-time founder, even then, that was my first SaaS company. My first business was an online ad network. So it didn't
Yep.
really teach me or my co-founder a lot about SaaS economics. And so in a lot of ways, even though Swarm was my second company, my first true, like real venture backed, kind of SaaS play, fortunately, we learned a lot of hard lessons quickly and kind of could outrun our bad decision making
Yeah.
by making decisions faster. But like we had no concept, for example, of like CAC LTV. So like all I cared about initially was let's show that there's a repeatable way to go sell this offering to small businesses. Well, what I didn't really understand at the time is that, a local bike shop on their best day, maybe can pay you like $50 a month per store location for this neat little widget that they didn't really need. Right. And so at no point when we were thinking about getting the company off the ground, did we actually do the math and go like, is this problem economically worth solving? There are
Right.
tons of amazing problems out there that should be solved. But with current technology, there's no economically viable way to make it worth doing. Right. And that was like a real shocker to me. I'm like, wow, like every, store manager I talked to is like, oh, this would be so great if I had it. But the reality is they couldn't really pay us anything. And then as soon as we got the inside sales team working, we realized like, wait, the more licenses we sell, the more money we lose. Like, it's
Yes.
like the classic kind of like startup euphoria where you're like, we did it, we figured it out. Like this thing's going to the moon. And then you just sort of like roll the sales forward and the costs associated with it 12 months. And it's like, wait, we're literally out of money in 9 months if we keep the we keep the sales up.
Yeah, that's another thing that people don't really realize, especially with like inside or outbound sales teams. Like you have to finance that somehow. You're not going to get actually, depending on like how long it takes for you to onboard the customer and do they pay you up front or do they pay you monthly? Like how do you actually recoup that? And that's what people have used venture for. But I think there's a lot of like really kind of bad business models out there that and I think that now with the kind of there's going to be a lot less B2B companies that are buying a lot less B2B software that it's going to be even harder. And so I think it's still the jury was always out, and that's why I think the B2B the SaaS model was always kind of questioned. Like, could you actually make that like cash flow positive at a certain given point. Like, of course you can make revenue and all that, but like you have to get ahead of paying your sales reps and all the cost of your R&D and
Right.
all that stuff. And like, it's still kind of, some people are now even questioning even more, given that SaaS as a kind of industry, like the multiples have compressed and all those different things. But people don't even think about that kind of stuff. And
People
I
forget
never
that
did. Yeah.
software is supposed to be this really efficient,
Yes.
really high margin, like
Right.
eighth
Right.
wonder of the world business. And somewhere along the lines in the zero interest rate era, I think many of us lost the plot a little bit. If I roll the clock back to mid 2000s, right? So my first company, again, it was an online ad network, but so we sold that to USA Today in 2008. But I remember at the time, like pure SaaS startups that were out there, like they'd be like a 4-person team doing like 20 million in revenue. And everyone's like, oh my God, like that's the greatest business ever. Like I think about like my friend Glenn out in Missoula,
Yeah.
Montana, him and his buddy, I can't even remember what the actual company was, but some like vertical SaaS play. And I think because they were engineers, they were just like allergic to employing other people. Like they
Right.
just so like they built this software and they wrote like an FAQ and coded enough of the bugs out that they didn't really need to hire customer support. And then they sold the whole thing through a channel. So they eventually sold the business for like 35 million bucks. But it was basically just two of them. Right. And so
Mhm.
like that's kind of quintessentially, I think if we get back to basics on software, like that's kind of how it's supposed to work.
So,
Right.
Is
Ryan, you're pretty prolific on, I guess it's called X now, formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of great advice. I follow you for founders and first time founders. Actually, what prompted you to come on the pod was you had a recent tweet about basically. So I'm summarizing it poorly, but founders are overspending and need to think about their business in terms of the private equity lens and
Yeah.
how they would make things more profitable right away. Have you always had that kind of eye towards things with this company Electric? Like you've been kind of lean and mean from the get-go, or are you sort of readjusting to the new era of less funds out there? Or does it not affect you because you have a .ai domain name, so you can raise no matter what?
Well, I mean, I'll be the first to say, I think for myself, I sort of fell a little bit victim to some of the decision making that many others did just when money was
Right.
widely available and perpetually coming in at better and better terms. I think I'll be the first to say like I think ultimately like I am a mouse looking for cheese, like many other people are, right? Like at a certain point, you do the things that you get rewarded for. When the rewards change dramatically in a short period of time, the approach needs to change. I think for me, my first two businesses were always so cash strapped that I came from a world where my first business, we raised $1 million. We got to, I don't know, probably 1.5 million in revenue.
Wow.
Sold it. The next one with Swarm, we got that to several million in revenue. So like the ratio of like paid in capital to revenue run rate was like very close to 1-to-1, if not better.
Right. Right.
And it was always this like really infuriating, just kind of like daily sufferfest of like, God, if we only had like an extra little bit of money, like we could do so
Yeah.
much more. But as everyone will say, like constraints really do kind of breed the best solutions and the best outcomes. And so I think where my big learning lesson of the last, 6.5 years or whatever it's been is that like in a world where those constraints largely get taken away, there's an element of discipline that, at least for me, this is far and away Electric. We ended last year around 50 million of ARR, like far and away the biggest company that I've run, fastest growing company that I've run. And
Yep.
so definitely some learning lessons for me. I never thought we were wasteful. And if you looked at our P&L and balance sheet, you looked at what everybody was working on, even when we were, even when our OpEx was probably double 2 years ago, what it is today,
Yep.
there was never a point where we were working on some like goofy side projects or, no one was ever sitting around. I think that's the challenge, is that when people talk about, cutting fat or eliminating waste, the reality is in most companies, it doesn't look wasteful. It doesn't look like fat and
Right.
fat. Like,
Right.
everyone's got a job and they're probably doing it.
Right.
I've also, in the two public companies I've worked at, it doesn't matter how big the company is. Everyone will always be complaining about a lack of resources.
Hmm.
I
Right.
guarantee you there are people at
Oh, yeah.
Salesforce and well today who are just like, I mean, just we don't have any resources. And it's like, really? Because you have 100,000 employees. Like, I find that hard to believe. And so, um,
How many
yeah,
employees is Electric right now?
we're about 225
Wow.
worldwide, most in the US. Yeah. Yeah. But that, I mean, look, that's down by over 50% from 18 months ago. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah, while it was really bittersweet to say goodbye to a lot of folks, and I wish we sort of weren't in that position. Like, the reality is we've done more this year in terms of just raw output and kind of, I think, like, value created for the business with a substantially smaller team. And so I think it's definitely been a good wake up call for both myself and the rest of the team. Yeah. On the other hand, it's like we had to do that while we were still sitting on a lot of the money that we raised, 2 years ago, which I think is a hard thing for some of the employees to reconcile. It's like, well, wait, if we had 70 million in cash, why am I losing my job? And I have a ton of empathy for that. On the other hand, it's like, we have to tune the business to what we want to do over the next 3 to 5 years.
Right.
And doing that from a position of strength when you actually still have the money is actually the best time to do it, even if it can be kind of hard to wrap your head
Yeah.
around.
I mean, most don't. Most wait till they don't have the money and
Yeah.
then doing the business. So that's, I mean, every month earlier that you can tune the business is more cash
Big
you
time.
keep.
Yeah.
Question for you on that. Was that so 18 months? That definitely sounds like on the earlier side of when people started really cutting. Was this did kind of the cutting the workforce in half? Was this an idea that your investors pushed? Was this you and I'm not sure you have active co-founders
No
or
co-founders. Yeah.
no co-founders. So was this did it come from you? You're like, we need to tighten up. I know things are going to get rough out there. We need to really and make sure that we have enough capital to go to run our plan for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it was a mix. I mean, definitely everyone around the table could see the writing on the wall. This was
Yep.
in spring of 2022. Like, hey, it's going to be, tough sledding out there for a little while. So, like, and I think we already, it was pretty clear that we were burning more than we probably should be relative to revenue and revenue growth.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't like there wasn't a ton of pushback, like, internally, on
Right.
doing it, at least philosophically. Like, yeah, sure, like, we need to do this. But I would say we did we did a reduction about a month ago, but we did that concurrently with launching a bunch of new products and launching an entirely new go to market motion.
Yep.
But that reduction, I mean, there was no talk of it at the board level. We went into our board meeting at the end of October,
Yep.
and the board knew that we had all these new products in the works. We knew we were kind of rewiring from a direct sales motion to a more partner-led sales motion.
Right.
So they knew all that was in the works. But we went in there and basically said, "Hey, great news! We're launching the new products on time in November. We're launching with our marquee distribution partners on time. And oh, by the way, a week before we do all that, we are going to also proactively pull some more cost out of the business before we go into next year." Which, those are two things that don't often happen in the same conversation. And
No.
definitely, some of our board members were like, wow, like, unprompted, but that's kind of what precipitated Sarah, like, my tweet or Zeep,
Yeah.
or we're calling it these days, is like spending enough time around, over the last 15, years or so, spending enough
Yeah.
time around, like, really seasoned investors. You start to anticipate the questions you're going to get. You can start to anticipate, like, the things people are going to ask you. And it's like, okay, well, what would a quote unquote, like, professional CEO do if they came in on their first day today and they were
Right.
hired to, like, quote, like, figure this out? Like, I'd probably look at it and go, okay, well, Like we need a sales motion that's way more efficient than the one we had before. We need a suite of products that allow us to attack more of the market, and we need to spend a lot less. So it's kind of like my view increasingly is like, like what are those things that like the new owner or the new CEO or the new person would do? And like, it's a useful thought exercise then say like, okay, well, what if I just go do those things? Cause it's a hell of a lot less fun when
Right.
someone else comes in and sort of does it to you.
I have a question. So, obviously, you're seeing you wrote this tweet, based on you talking to other entrepreneurs and all of this. For one, what does your actual founder network look like? Do you communicate a lot with them, and like, how did you find all this
And are you
out?
based in New York now or San Francisco?
I'm in New York now. Yeah. I
Okay.
moved back in
Boo.
2016.
We're both
Yeah.
in SF, yeah.
Come back to the good coast.
I mean, I still love it out there. But I grew up on the East Coast, so yeah, but you're not going to convert me back, unfortunately. Yeah, the founder network thing is really interesting. Like, I've been lucky that I've only ever done startup stuff since I
Yes.
was a teenager, and so the weird thing is, many of my closest friends who are now also founders, we were all friends before they were founders. Like, it's just kind of funny the way that it worked out when I look at, like one of my best friends and my roommate right after college, out in Los Angeles. He works in the music industry, but I don't know, probably 4 years ago, he went out on his own to go start, an artist management and publishing company. And, as of this week, fingers crossed, he's selling a chunk of it to a PE firm, and I couldn't be happier for him. But like, when I met him, like he was just like an assistant to a guy who managed Barry Manilow, and we make fun of him to no end for that. But years later, he's since become, a really successful founder in that space. And like, I have a long list of people like that. I used to, my best friend, Zach, I used to sleep on his couch. Him and his roommate, Matt, his roommate, Matt, started a company called Orchard, which is a fintech company. He then became a partner at QED. Zach was the founder of a crypto startup called BlockFi.
Right.
Which you may have heard about in the news.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
I was like, I was sleeping on that couch, but none of them were founders. Like, we were just like
Do you
idiot
think
kids.
you rubbed off on them? They got the bug from you?
No, I don't want to take any credit. I would like to think that at least for a lot of my friends who weren't founders that I've known for a long time, I at least maybe there's a small percentage where they were like, God, if he can do it, then I can definitely. Um, so I don't know. Maybe that just has more to do with I think as time has gone on, I've really valued spending time with people where like we kind of have similar ambitions, but also value the same thing in people. Like, I don't like hanging out with people just because they're successful or because they're a founder or
Right.
whatever. Like for me, it's not just, people that I hang out with. Oh, they happen to be founders. It's like I was getting coffee with a friend of mine this morning. He's a professional NASCAR driver and, does on-air commentary for NBC Sports. But if you threw him into the crowd at like a startup meetup, you'd be indistinguishable, right? It's a lot of these
Right.
just similar qualities of like, you have a chip on your shoulder, you have like an immense intellectual curiosity about the world. And sometimes that makes you a founder. Sometimes that might mean you're a race car driver.
So how did you find out about, or just the companies are still, because I hear the same things as well. The companies still haven't, like, they still have good balance sheets, and they still like haven't actually reckoned like with what their ARR is, and like what their cash out date is going to be, and also like when they go back to the raise the venture markets, like they may not be able to, and maybe thinking about like a PE exit or something like that should be something that they should be going and doing.
I mean, there's probably a 6 month period where at least once a week, I was getting a text message or an email from one of my investors saying,
Mm.
hey, I got this founder. Can
He
you
he won't listen, or she
can
won't
you like
listen.
have a chat, like share some perspective, which I totally get. I mean, if I was a first time founder and had raised tens of millions of dollars in a relatively easy time to go do
Yeah.
it,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
yeah.
all I knew, kind of don't blame them, particularly when you probably had a bunch of people sitting around the table saying things like, "Hey, let's invest aggressively. Let's do this. Let's do
Yep.
that." Um, and it's kind of like Matt Turk posted on Instagram or on X the other day. He was like, you know, um, like raise more just so that you have it in case you need it, right? Or I'm paraphrasing, but sort of something like that. And it's like that's what a lot of VCs were saying is like, oh hey,
Hmm.
we're going to do a $50 million round, but if you can get 75 or 100, like we can kind of sock it away for a rainy day. Well, the reality is like that basically never happened. Like if you
I
raised
totally
more, you
agree.
just spent more, and now your problem is twice as big. And that was, I mean, kind of like with us, like we in our Series D in October 21, we went out to raise uh 70, basically filled it in 72 hours, ended up raising 90, and then like less than 3 months later, raise another like 25 on top of that as an extension.
Crazy.
And but my view was like, let's literally pretend like we don't have that extra 25 or even the 20. And like I think about it now, I'm like, we're burning so much less than we've ever burned before, but even still, like that extra 25 makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So
Have you thought about getting profitable, or you're still planning to show the growth needed to raise that next round?
multiple things should probably be true, right? Which is like I keep telling our board and kind of the mandate that I've set for the management team is that like I don't actually care, and we shouldn't care so much about the timeline. What matters are the kind of finite immovable objects, which is we have a finite amount of cash in the bank, and we have a milestone by which we will get disproportionately more credit by way of enterprise value if we hit it. So for me, that's if we can get to 100 million of ARR while still growing at double digits and be at or near cash flow positive break even ish, we can do that without needing any additional outside capital. We can write our ticket. We've got ultimate optionality for the future.
Right.
And so
Right.
um, we're lucky in the sense that we're an SMB play. So every year there's a 500,000 new companies that we can conceivably sell to. We don't have a ton of direct competitors. We've been doing this for a long time. And so, my common refrain is just like, this is ours to lose. It's ours to lose. And we've
I've
been given a
never
lot.
heard anyone say we're lucky because we're an SMB play. I feel like SMB is sort of notoriously like the kiss of death. I mean, our business, we've sort of pivoted away from selling to SMBs because they're just so churny. And I'm
And
wondering, especially if
expensive
you
to acquire. Yeah. As
like
well.
how you find that, or have you found like a niche within? I mean, there have been like, look at QuickBooks. They've
Right.
cracked SMB. If you have any tips or tricks for cracking SMB, or how you've managed to be successful there.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. At least in my last company, we kind of fell victim to the same thing everybody else did, which was like once I actually understood unit economics, I'm like, whoa, this doesn't work at all, right? So
Yeah.
we were lucky at my last company. We integrated with all these point of sale providers that the retailers were using. All the new cloud based point of sale ones, right? And so what we realized very quickly is that at the time, most of that software was actually sold by local independent resellers. And so what we realized, because we were integrated with all these solutions, that the way to do it, the way to get CAC down like demonstrably was let's pivot from direct sales to a channel play. And that's
Right.
look, historically, the only way you could make money in software was you either sold huge enterprise deals and therefore your CAC LTV was a no-brainer, or you had no sales team in a traditional sense and you sold through third parties, like kind of an OEM play, channel play,
Yep.
right? So that was really the only sort of blow off valve I knew, which was, hey, if we can get other people to bundle this into the packages that they're selling, then we'll be in a very different place. And so we we pulled that off, and basically overnight we went from having like 16 salespeople to four. And those four salespeople were doing like quadruple the sales volume almost
Wow.
immediately, just because the partners were coming to us and saying like, hey, like instead of us grinding it out to close one, $1,000 ACV deal on the phone, we could have a slightly longer conversation with a reseller who would move hundreds of units, and 100K plus in ARR in a single phone call. So yeah, but like channels are really hard. Like you have to know how to sell your own product before you have any hope of getting someone else to sell your product. And
Right.
so it's not exactly a good recipe for example, like a first time founder with a new business trying to prove product market fit. Like
Right.
that, I'm still a huge believer of like doing things that don't scale, but being intentional that they don't scale. Because if you're just starting out, obviously you just have to prove that people really love what you're doing and the problem that you're solving and that there's some economic rationale there. Distribution, more scalable distribution can be figured out later. But that's ultimately the path we were on, and have been on with electric, which was this very coin operated, marketing driven SMB inside sales motion was a really good way to prove demand and get to our first kind of mid 8 figures of ARR. But I sort of knew from the beginning, like, hey, at some point, the path to victory, the path to this having public company economics is ultimately going to be finding channel partners who can, bundle our solution with adjacent products where there's a really nice value add. And like that'll propel us into the, hundreds of millions of ARR. So this was the year where we just said, okay, if the pressure to really put up big top line growth is kind of off, let's just rewire the entire go to market motion so that instead of spending, thousands and thousands of dollars on the CAC, we need to be in a position where each incremental customer effectively costs us zero.
Right. Right. And now, as you kind of already mentioned, but the other strategy, once you have, obviously you have certain products and you have different channel partners, is it to go with additional products with those same and expand the channel partners?
Yeah. And that's kind of how we've looked at it, which is sort of like two good levers to the business, at least, with IT, with the stuff that we do for SMBs, it's a huge expense line. You think about what you're spending on software
Yeah.
and computers and all that other stuff. And again, there's no like great solution, right? So for like a lot of SMBs, it's still like, okay, office manager is going to run to the Apple store and we're going to like figure it out. And so, yeah, what we've gotten really focused on is let's just, make it really easy by way of a freemium offering or any customer can get in the product and then just make it modular. So as you need more, you can get more. There's really no friction there. And then we're building these modules are effectively all different SKUs. And so if you think about it, like the channel play allows us to get in front of a huge number of SMBs at scale. But the modules and the marketplace and the product also enables us to offer them a lot of different SKUs. And so then it's just a question of how good are we at optimizing customers coming in from our partners and then driving them
Right.
to something really valuable where they end up making another purchase.
Right. I'm curious. So over your kind of entrepreneur your career, what are some of like and it'd be great if it was electric, but what are some of like the oh shit moments that you've had?
How much time do we have?
We got some time. Well, like the biggest ones that you're like, this is an existential risk to my business.
I mean, a story I've told a few times, but way back in the beginning, not having any co-founders and being somewhat new to the kind of like IT service management industry, I was able to raise my seed round basically just off of a deck and an idea. Mike Brown from Bowery Capital in New York, I'd known him for a while. They kind of already had a thesis on this space, so that just like came together really, really well. But I remember when I got the wire for the first $1 million, I was at home sitting on my couch and I was just thinking of all the ways that the business wouldn't work, other ways that other people would come in and compete with us. And so there was probably a good 30, 45 minutes where I legitimately thought about ways I could send the money back. Let's see. Like, well, like, I wonder if this would be like a bad look with his LPs. Like they are like what would happen if I literally just wired it back and said I didn't want to do it? And fortunately, I talked myself out of it. But like, yeah, from like minute one, like that was an existential thing. But No, I think a couple other ones that come to mind. We had a very high profile or sort of like highly regarded executive join right after or right during our Series B.
Yep.
Kind of the quintessential, like you have a board member who's like, this person's the best and
Yeah.
going to transform everything. And
Let me guess, they weren't.
And this was sort of your typical like Ivy League education, like worked at the, big four consulting shop, was early at some,
Right.
mega unicorn startup, right? It's like, what could go wrong? And I think in the end, um, yeah, like I think she realized that this wasn't really for her. But the way that she went about leaving, the business was probably one of the most unprofessional things I've seen in my life. And so, and then,
Please share if you can.
I think she didn't want to feel like she had egg on her face saying like, hey, you
Yeah.
know what? Like, I actually don't
Yes.
have the energy for this, which would have been disappointing, but fine. Instead, sort of, initially conjured up some narrative of impropriety, accounting improprieties, some things and,
Oh
fired
shit.
off it was, I mean, it was the whole thing. And I give a lot of credit to my board for just saying like, hey, wow. Okay. But like, let's look at the facts here. And within 2, 3 days, it was basically just a round of apologies going around like, man, this like really sucks. And wow, I can't believe she did that. And, um, but there's that initial moment where it's like, oh my God, like this probably one of the most credentialed people I've ever hired basically
Right.
just flames out in a major way.
Do you
Two
think there's
months.
any we've had a couple people that we've had a number of people that we've parted ways with, and most of them have left in a fine way. Like
Mhm.
it's been fine, and in fact, I've maintained relationships with a lot of these people. Sometimes we just have to eliminate a position because we're not investing in that anymore. But we've had a couple that, like only one that got litigious, but a couple that have kind of gone out poorly. And I'm wondering if you now, like in retrospect, saw any red flags during the hiring process to anticipate that, or is it just like random?
I think it can be both with executive hires though. Um, I think the courting process with this particular hire was way too long. And that was one of the
Mm.
things me and actually the board member who had recommended her, we sort of did a debrief once the smoke cleared. And he's like, yeah, you know what? In hindsight, if we bring someone into the business and you start spending a lot of time together, there's some reasonable time frame by which if they can't really develop conviction and say, like, let's
Yeah.
go, let's do
Yeah.
this, I'm
Yeah.
ready
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is a red flag. You can be thoughtful and you can be diligent, but if you're 4 or 5 months later and you effectively got someone who's kind of hemming and hawing and honestly can't decide what they want to do, like the can't decide is basically a no, just in a different
Right.
packaged up a little bit differently.
Right.
Yeah, so now on the other hand, there's a different flavor that we have two executives that we brought on at the top of the year, brought on a COO and a CRO. And in those cases, there was a long courting process, but it was very mutual. And it was through the lens of, with our COO, for example, it was really just advisory. Like, hey, we're really trying to rethink how we run, services and delivery here. He had another gig. And so we just informally started having a lot of phone conversations, getting to know each other, giving advice. It wasn't until sort of several months later, I was like, hey, dude, what if, and same thing, with our CRO, he had been at Twitter for 9 years. He built their SMB business there.
Who's your CRO?
Joe Farner.
Oh, I guess it was different time for me.
But yeah, Dick Costello and Adam Bain hit me up when he was coming on the market and said like, he's one of the best we've worked with. And,
Nice.
same kind of thing though, but I was just like, Joe, like you've been at the same company for 9 years. Like, I don't want you to have a misfire either.
Right.
Right. Like, let's really make sure. And so we basically brought him on as sort of, initially just kind of some advisory stuff, then actually as a consultant where around this time last year, he actually came to New York and really helped our team with the 2024 planning process. And like, that's the best way to figure out
Oh
if
yeah.
Right.
someone really going to be a great
Right.
fit is I was like, oh shit, like we're in there doing the work, rolling our sleeves up, and this all feels right. And if it feels right on both sides, then you kind of have your answer. So definitely, yeah, like the exact opposite of the scenario that I described
Right.
before. So
Right. And sometimes you could just make some misfires, and they could just the courting process
yeah,
and everything could.
you're never gonna be 100%, but I
Yeah.
think as time has gone on though, it's all about like developing more and more conviction about
Right.
how do we just reduce the risk further and further and further. I
Right.
mean, I can point to so many companies where like I'm an angel investor in a company that's doing about 1 million of ARR. The problem is this time last year, they were doing 1 million of ARR, and it really came down to the founder hiring a VP of sales who was really the wrong fit, then
Right.
not staying
Does
on
anyone
top
get
of.
that hire right the first time?
Uh,
Anyone?
Rarely. We had a phenomenal early sales leader, Matt Grossbard, who was with us for a super long time. Again, but that was like it took me 3 companies to like nail that hire out of the
Straight
gate.
Right.
and
But
confounders, but
the tricky part if you're the tricky part if you're an early stage company though is that if you, for example, you make the wrong sales hire and you don't figure it out immediately, to the outside world, you just look like a crappy company that isn't growing.
Yep.
Like, a Series A investor isn't really going to care. Like, oh no, customers love our product. Like, we just had a bad head of sales for 9 months. It's just going to be like, well, you're just not an exciting company. And so, early stages is when those key hires really are going to directly impact how the business looks. Like, it'll validate or invalidate your strategy, right or wrong.
Right. Curious on how you view like board composition, and also how big is your board right now? And then also, and maybe like a third question, how do you work with them?
I went a little bigger earlier with the board for electric. So Bowery and Primary actually wound up cutting equal sized checks in our seed round.
Yep.
And so the view from both of them was like, hey, well, like we'd love a board seat because we, essentially, Brad from Primary was like, hey, we cut a check similar, same size as Mike. And I said, actually, I think it would be great to have both of you on the board anyways,
Right.
because I don't want, at least for me, I was like, I don't want just sort of like one preferred director steering a lot of the strategy. I was like, if I have two of the best early stage VCs in New York on my board at the same time at inception, I'm going to already get the average of both opinions, which are already going to be different, but probably equally valid. But then what ended up happening is it creates this weird dynamic where it's like, okay, if you're going to have two preferred directors, you need to have then a 5-person board so that the, founder can have essentially
Control.
three seats. And so, I basically, so the way I structured it then, it was Mike and Brad as the two preferred seats. I had one, and then my co-founder from my first two companies, I put him in as an independent director, and then I left the fifth seat open. So I still controlled 3 of the 5 seats. And I think for what I'd say is like for second time founders, what I think is really valuable, and particularly if it's your first time as CEO or your first time as like a solo founder or anything like that, putting someone on your board at the seed stage that knows you incredibly well professionally and is also essentially further along than you professionally is super, super helpful. Because what Rudd was able to do in that first year we were in business was essentially like in private, like call me out on my BS. Like, hey,
Huh.
dude, like you're doing that thing again. Or, hey, man, like I've worked with you for 10 years and I know that you naturally don't get as excited about this part of the business. Or, hey, you've never spent a lot of time on, product vision and clearly the board's not getting that. So like, hey, let's talk about that. So having him on the board for the first, he was on the board up until the Series B,
Yeah.
hugely valuable. I mean, just like it's like having someone in your corner that knows you that well. And so, yeah. So in terms of board composition early on, like having enough people to get a diversity of opinions was important, but also having people that knew me that could kind of coach me through stuff was really important.
And then that was at the seed round. So five person, essentially five seats. And now what does it look like?
7.
Seven. Okay.
Yeah, and so we've got two independent directors now, and I mean same thing, super 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 helpful. So Emmanuel Scala, she's the SVP of customer success, now SVP of operations at Toast.
Yep.
And
Oh,
she was
great.
there from 50 million of ARR to, now they're north of a billion. She's run pretty much every department of that company. That was super, super important for me because I wanted someone in the boardroom that was a present day operator.
Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, she joined the board when Toast was this high flying pre IPO company. Now, she's a public company executive. She's had a pretty strong highlight reel, leading up to that point. And it's just a completely different type of perspective you're going to get when you have someone like that in the room who can kind of be the other side of the coin to the more,
Yes.
30,000-foot observational approach that say like Jeff Richards from GGV, who joined our board in the Series B. He's great. But he's going to come in with a very different point of view, uh, helpful, but very different than say Emmanuel. And then we have our second independent director, Tim Harvey. He's run a bunch of companies. He ran a company in the managed security space. So he knew kind of the software services, IT kind of mix, but at the same time, he's on like 6 other boards of growth stage companies.
Right.
But he's not an investor. He's really there almost like kind of a quasi exec chairman. Like he knows every one of my executive team. He comes into the office. He kind of knows the just sort of the like little internal politics and, stuff like that. And so like that's really important because I can go to Tim and Emmanuel and say like, hey, here's how I was thinking about, for example, like the bonus plan for next year. Like,
Yeah.
right. And then it's like they can throw up all over it and say, good thing you didn't send that to the, to the rest of the board or whatever. And so like independent directors are really helpful from that standpoint because they allow you to develop this muscle of intuition of like, okay, like I have a question I'm going to ask them, but I can already anticipate the answer. And therefore I've like answered it for myself.
Right.
So this is so prior companies you had a co-founder and this time you don't.
Yep.
Do you find you need to rely on the board more? Do you rely on your executive team, or are you just, seasoned enough now that you can do it all without needing that other person next to you?
Definitely can't do it all. I think what I realized in the first two companies, and I was really lucky to have the same co-founder in both. We had a phenomenal relationship, really good run over a decade, and he was best man at my wedding. We're still very close friends. I'm now on his board at his new company. So so that was all really good. I think by the time we got to the deciding what we want to do for a third company, he wanted to do some stuff in the consumer space. I was really passionate about getting electric off the ground, so it was a very very kind of amicable um, fork in the road. But, sorry, what's the
But you
question?
didn't want to find someone else,
Oh,
or
the
like,
co-founder thing. Yeah. I
Yeah.
just felt like there are way too many people who feel like they have to have a co-founder to sort of like check the box. I can say definitively that being a solo founder does not have anywhere near the stigma that it used to. I
Yep.
mean, you need
That's
a
totally
founder
true.
and team, but they don't necessarily have to be co-founders. And there's also different flavors of co-founder. um, that can work really well. And so for me, it was just like, why am I going to give a whole bunch of equity to someone just to say that I have a co-founder? I definitely, when I think about my first two companies, though, it's like, you know, most of the pain and suffering is self-inflicted. It's mostly just like the psychological roller coaster every day of experiencing all these things for the first time. And so I think like I don't want to trivialize the value of a co-founder. Like for Rudd and I in our first two companies we had a lot of overlapping skill sets. Right. And so like,
right?
I don't know that like we
That's tough. That's
necessarily
tough.
needed each other in the sense like we were both non-technical, still are. Right. And so like,
Right.
but the reality is like, we did two things really well, which was divide and conquer, right? So he's like, I'll handle all the fundraising. I need you to actually run the business commercially. Um, and so in both companies that worked out really well. But really the biggest value for he and I was when the shit gets really hard to just be able to like go sit in a conference room and be like, woof, like,
Yeah.
like this
So
sucks.
who do you do that with now? Like, is it a team member? Is it your board? Is it your partner? Like, do you have someone to kind of share that burden?
Yeah, I think, I mean, not in the way that you would, not in the way that you would with a co-founder. No, I think I've been really lucky. My longest serving executive, at Electric is my head of people, Jamie. She's been with me 5 years. And so there's definitely
Right.
days where she and I can just sit in the office and go like, wow, today's been a day. Right. But and then I think I'm also lucky enough that I have some very, very close friends that I've just known for a long time that,
Yeah.
whether
Those are
they're
the
in tech
best.
or not, like some ways it's almost nicer to be able to vent to people that aren't directly related
Yeah.
to your business. Like I'll give you a good example, like in our Series C. So this was end of 2020 going into 2021. I had a spreadsheet of like 40 potential lead investors for the Series C. So 40 like brand name VCs that were like, yeah, we're interested, we're interested, we're interested. And they all had the copy of our most recent board deck. And so right before, it was literally this time, but end of the year 2020. And so all these investors were like, all right, great. So you're kicking off the fundraise at the beginning of January. Like hit us up first week of January when you have like the final plan and the deck and the big numbers from this past year. So I'm thinking like, no problemo. Like we took the business from 8 to 17.5 million in 2020. We were forecasting to go from like 17 to 38 million, in 21, 40. And I'm like, this is going to be a freaking bonanza. Like, can't wait. Right. So I come back from New Year's. It's the first week in the office, send the deck out. And when I tell you my phone was ringing off the hook with people passing, like I mean, I got 16 passes in 48 hours. It just got to a point where I'm like, if another VC emails me, like in response to me sending the deck, like, yeah, let us know if you have a few minutes to catch up tonight. Okay. That means they're passing.
I
you
know
know,
that.
I
right.
hate those
I
calls. Just
finally,
just send the email. I'm
I
like,
I
finally,
just
agree. I don't
send an
want to
email.
call to hear you're rejecting me.
don't schedule a call. Yeah. Like it was,
Oh,
I finally got to a point where I'm like, should I just have like a little autoresponder that's like, if you're passing, it's all good. If you're
You know,
not, it's
my husband did this to me. He he met with me in person to tell me he wasn't interested in dating me. We were not dating. We had like hooked up and he was like, "I just want you to know I'm not interested in dating you." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't
what?
interested in you either, you asshole. Why do you need to like meet with me? Just ghost. Like just fade out. I
be the
don't need to
normal
like."
person and ghost.
Oh
But
man.
he's such an honest, like, nice guy that and then I was like, "Okay, now that you're saying no to me, I am gonna make you marry me." "No,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want you."
Yeah. It's funny because that totally doesn't work in the VC world.
No, no.
No, it
But,
doesn't.
but yeah. So anyway, like, and so, it was one of those like existential moments where, over the course of a week, I
Was
go
there
from,
some, like, nudity on your deck or something? Why
yeah, I
did
mean,
people say that?
Jeff Richards put it the best way. He's like, it's a VC's job to take meetings and look at data room,
Right.
Yeah,
right?
it
And
is.
so,
Yeah.
like, for our business, like the challenging part for a traditional pure SaaS investor circa 2020, if you're looking at electric, was that yes, the top line growth was really high, the market was really compelling, but at the end of the day, because of at the time, the heavy services component to what we were
Right.
doing, the
Right,
story,
right.
it was really hard to sort of like underwrite to like valuation that would make sense. Like the metrics just weren't all the way there under the hood.
Right.
And which I totally understood. But what shocked me, which lesson learned, was like, yeah, of course every VC on Sand Hill Road was like, sure, send us the deck, right? Because we're growing
Yeah.
fast. It's a compelling business. But, Jeff's point to me around that time was like, yeah, of course they want to see the data room because they honestly just want to make sure they're not missing anything. And
Yeah.
Well,
like, maybe
well,
there's more to the story,
and
right?
also to make sure that so like they kind of cover their asses to their other partners is like, oh no, we already looked through this company. It's like
Yeah.
Yeah, we ran to
because
ground and like, the
yeah,
metrics or whatever. Now
yeah,
in the end,
yeah,
so like I got to a point where I'm like, there's 4 names left on this spreadsheet out of 40. Like I am fucked. Like this is not going to be, this is,
yes,
and so to your sort of original question about kind of like, yeah, the co-founder thing, like that definitely would have been a time where it might have
right,
been a little bit
right,
helpful to kind of have someone to vent to. But, and then in the end, was the 4 names left on the list all made offers to invest. So in the end, it was like,
wow,
okay, I actually got to a fairly competitive round for some really, really excellent investors. And so like landed the plane and we got a tremendous lead for a Series C. But yeah, as you guys know, it's just kind of like those,
So what
it,
round are you on anyway? This is like you've raised a lot.
yeah,
Was that your final priced round or you did a D?
no, no. So then we did a Series D at the end of that year
Oh,
that
wow.
GGV led. But yeah, so probably 212 million paid in all in.
yep,
But again, I think we're fortunate enough to be in a position where we can sort of have been able to credibly say like, look, we think we can cross 100 of ARR and still be growing pretty fast without needing any capital beyond this.
right,
And
That's
right,
amazing.
that's that. Well, like I got to make it happen. I think it looks
yeah,
good. It
yeah,
feels
yeah,
like we can go
yeah.
do that. But
Just
yeah,
one last question. I know we have a couple minutes, and we appreciate your time. Just on that, and I know it sounds like you're involved in a lot of like early stage companies and other companies. What would you kind of advise people looking to fundraise right now, as far as not a lot of investors or fundraising. There's also a lot of investors out there. It's really uncertain who's actually investing. What do you advise people? Go through founder networks, create your own relationships with investors. What do you advise people to do?
yeah, all the above. It's a math problem ultimately, right?
Yeah,
Partially, right? It's first and foremost a math problem, but the biggest thing, and this isn't unique to early stage founders, it's true at all stages, is forget what you know about these sort of like fake benchmarks of like, well, such and such company
right,
raised at Series A with these
right,
metrics, so I should be able to. No, you shouldn't, right? Like the number one thing that for me has always been a helpful gut check and is true for a company at any stage is if you're going to go out and ask other people for money, you have to first ask yourself, would I invest in this company? Would, I put 25 or 50 grand of my own money into this business right now at this
right,
valuation
right,
and like be really, really honest about that. Particularly at the early stages, it has less to do with specific goalposts and more about like, is this a really compelling thing that, is minimally devoid of a lot of the obvious risk? And therefore, like something that people look at and go, yeah, like I get it. This seems like a great deal. I mean,
right.
I haven't done a new angel deal in almost a year. And then I saw probably the most exciting company that I've seen in years. And it's like, it's a company that's doing AI for weather forecasting. And like they have SpaceX and the Air Force as like 2 of their biggest customers. And like
That's
they're raising
cool.
a seed extension and like it's this bulletproof founding team. And granted, that's like on the high end of like
Yeah.
just no brainer of all no. I was like, I feel like this is an intelligence
Send it
test. Like,
over.
Yeah.
Share the
but
love.
but even still, or I can think of another one. I met a guy last week who worked for a big consulting company. Tracking billable hours was a nightmare. And he's like, yeah, I just basically wrote a Python script and did some API integrations to both track and annotate my hours in a fully automated manner. And I was like, wait a second, like there isn't software that does it. He's like, not this way, not that automatically annotates it. And I was like,
Right.
hold on, have you like raised any money yet? He's like, no, I just coded this up in my apartment in Brooklyn. I have like 10 paying customers. Like, I built it because I built it for myself. And I'm like, check, 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 check.
Yeah.
Like, so, but for every one of those, there's, I'll get like a pitch deck, and it's just like, some business where it's like not immediately clear why this is the right team to go be building it.
Right.
The kind of classic pitch of like, well, if we had $2 million, then we could go build the product. And it's like, well, show me what you can do without that.
Yeah, and taking it back even for like that's obviously a great for angel investors. Like those same things that like series B, C, and D, they just have different check marks that they have. But yeah, it comes down to like and also I would say, in my experience, sometimes it's just like not the right time for a lot of VCs to actually write that check. Or it's just they're working on another deal. And so that's why it's kind of you need to go and like send those 40 emails and kind of just like it's kind of as you mentioned, like a math equation.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of my investors at my last company is like the only way you know an investor is really interested is if they change their schedule to meet with you, or they send you a term sheet.
Right. Yeah, that's
Absent
totally
that, you
true.
don't really know.
Yeah, that's totally true. Well, let's wrap it up. We really appreciate your time, Ryan. It was awesome. Hopefully, everybody listening got a lot of learnings. You gave a lot of knowledge on here. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
And
Kevin,
see
thanks so
you.
much. And
Yeah.
Sarah, longtime fan on Twitter. So glad we finally got to
I,
meet.
It's
I
Sarah's the
named my
best on
son after
Twitter.
you, Ryan. So I'm the bigger fan of you.
The win's a win. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.